Colleagues, just as we begin, I'd like to ask you please to turn our screens on to confirm, as per our best practices, to see who we've got, please. It looks like we have quorum. I'd like to welcome everyone to the fourth meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. This is a virtual meeting during the COVID-19 emergency. City Hall is temporarily closed to the public for in-person attendance at standing committees and council meetings, but meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. I will look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Colleagues, we have two items on the consent agenda. If you wish to speak to either, we will pull them and deal with them separately, or I'm pleased to deal with them in one motion. So I'll ask if anyone wishes. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Your Worship. Split them, please.
All right, so done. So the first item is the London Community Grants Policy Update, 2.1 on the agenda. And I will look for comments. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks to staff for the preparation of this report. I think it really addresses a lot of really important issues. One of the things that I really like about it is looking towards a lens of improving the accessibility of the application process, recognizing some of the different manners in which groups and communities might wish to access it, rather than a very formal and lengthy written submission process, allowing for some alternatives in that. So I'm glad to see that come forward. I did have a chance to ask a question of Ms. Smith earlier about the movement up of the 25% allocation within the capital grants program component. One of the things I would have liked to have seen is having that flagged for us a little earlier during budget process, because when we talked about that 25%, we also talked about the opportunity to find budget opportunities to increase the community grants program to be able to compensate for that allocation. So in this circumstance, it's about $166,000, and we didn't really get a chance to discuss that during the budget process. So I recognize the objectives, and I support the objectives. I still have those concerns with the reallocation of funding and how that's being done. I would like the opportunity in future years to be able to take a look at how we augment the budget for the program in order to address all the concerns and make sure that it's globally funded for all groups that might access it. So I would suggest, I'm not going to make a motion to that effect right now, but I would suggest that for the 2022 budget update, that be contemplated and included in our discussions at that time.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments with respect to London Community Grants Program? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did have an amendment adding on a Part C that was circulated by the clerk a short while ago for Council's consideration. That civic administration be directed to bring back recommendations for the potential introduction of an anonymized application process for the London Community Grants Program that could be implemented for 2022 funding allocations in use going forward. My intention with this is to anonymize the process. I spoke with Ms. Smith and her team that this could be viewed as those who wish to serve on the committee and those as well looking to apply for funding from the committee. Had heard from the public some concerns about different organizations and members serving. So that's what's before you today, and I believe I have a seconder in Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I won't repeat everything Councillor Pelosi just said. I'm happy to second this. This was something that was discussed when this item was at committee as well. And of course, those councillors who have participated in the anti-bias hiring training know that it was a practice that was raised during that training session as well for our internal hires. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to look to see if there's an application through the community grants program as well. To create that extra blind so that all applications are judged on their merit, not the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I believe, like Councillor Turner expressed some time ago, I'm uncomfortable with the percentages and the minimums that are suggested here. I would much rather prefer we set amounts for those specifically. And I also wondered, because of some of the concerns about particular groups communicating their programs well to the committee that makes the choices here. I wonder if we couldn't set up some kind of middle level of middle management, if you will, but a subcommittee chosen from those particular demographics that might be a way to reach out to them well, and also interact with the staff that are going to be choosing the programs. Seemed to me that might solve some of the dilemmas that were expressed in the report. So those were my concerns. Maybe the last little point I had is we're looking at racism in London as something to fight. It seems there's much anti-talk here, and I wondered is that how it is, or is it something to heal? Do we have to heal ourselves of that, or do we have to fight it? So I wonder what might be a more effective perspective to get us to the point where we're beyond it. Those are my comments.
Okay, those are comments. I wasn't sure that was a question, but I would suggest that, as Councillor Turner has suggested, that that be taken forward for consideration for the next process associated with the London Community Grants Program. Unless you had a direct question, Councillor Van Hulst.
I think not, Your Worship.
All right, thanks very much. I have Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The first, I will not support this. The timing on this is not in my submission sufficient for me to even consider this. I received it. This was sent to the clerk at 3:39 p.m. for a meeting that started at 4 o'clock, and I received it just minutes ago. So any investigation or discussion or contemplation of this that I would have liked to have done, I'm not a member of the committee where this came to. So on that alone, I wouldn't have supported this. And I think everybody's heard me on this in the past. There's no reason that these things couldn't be received slightly earlier and give all of us a chance to think about it. But there's concerns about it from my point of view. First of all, this is not these decisions are not political decisions. So they don't come here as sort of with political pressure on approving or not approving things. They're done by a committee or a group that meets privately, I assume, and makes these decisions on the merits. And I think there's a bit of an assumption here that they can't do that, or it wouldn't be as effective unless the proposers are actually anonymous. And I'm not sure I agree with that suggestion. But more importantly, if the presenters of cases for funding are completely anonymous, we would get into a situation where people may be asking for substantial amounts of money, and the committee wouldn't even know who those people are asking for substantial amounts of money. They may have no expertise in that area. It may be something they've never done before. And it may be necessary to know who the proposer is to actually evaluate what they're asking for. So, for instance, if a very experienced group in a particular area came for a grant, I would want to know that. I would want to know that they had the capabilities and the abilities to do it, as opposed to maybe another group who had absolutely no expertise. So, without more time to hear where this came from, what it's about, and hear the background, I can't support it.
Thank you. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, perhaps to Councillor Pelosa or Councillor Lewis, I'm wondering if they might be able to explain how you could see this working, just considering the idea for the first time just now. I'm not so sure about it, and I wonder how, from a practical perspective, how you think it would work, and maybe walking me through an example of how you think it could be working would help me understand what problem you're trying to solve with the proposed change. I certainly understand the example of the hiring practice and anonymizing names, but I think a grant application process where organizations are applying is quite different.
Councillor Pelosi, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Councillor Helmer for the question. Some community concerns have been raised, as you cited. The anonymized process could be used in things like the hiring process for the city advisory committee selections. And some residents of the community asked about the selection process for those who serve on the granting process as well, looking to see if this process can help with the selection, that making sure that it really is bias-free, that it's not just friends of friends, that everyone has an equal opportunity to apply for it. Have attended several different speaker events, learning myself and having that conversation, sharing some of those resources back to Ms. Smith's team, looking to see how this could be implemented. This is for the potential implementation. Her department has asked for an opportunity to look into it of how it could be used in this process of those who serve on the panel, as well as though applying for the process. It could certainly be a pilot program for 2022 to see how it would work, if it improved anything that we're trying to do with diversity and inclusion and engaging more people, recognizing that you need an opportunity to apply for the projects that everyone starts somewhere, that you need a chance to apply, that you're not always the biggest and best organization or the most well-known, of how we can help make sure that we're inclusive in those opportunities. So that's the space that this motion's coming from, of looking to see how we can do better at bringing more people in, or those who are usually excluded or intimidated from the process, that they feel that they would have just an equal opportunity as anybody else, or their organization, regardless if they're well-known or not.
Councillor Elmer?
Thank you.
Councillor Slee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I support the motion. I think what the motion does, to me, it speaks to itself. It's very clear. It's an opportunity, as Councillor Pelosa kind of spoke on, to remove the bias that that sometimes is part of these processes. I think we recognize as an institution, it's important to fight racism, and I stress on the part of fighting it, because it's not something that's easily healed, because the pains and the wounds are deep and long, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think this is one step in actually trying to achieve a tangible result. I think this is an impactful way of doing something that's positive. When you talk about organizations and maybe them not having, the street creds, or having a history or having a resume that speaks volumes, I think any of us would probably know of someone who maybe has many years of experience in a job, but doesn't mean that they're necessarily the best person for the job or the best person to deliver the results for the community. I think the application should speak for itself. The application should demonstrate how the person or the organization will achieve the goal that's needed at task. When you talk about setting 25% of this budget to tackle anti-racism, anti-Indigenous racism, I think you're going to see a lot of new applicants, a lot of new organizations that maybe don't have that depth of, historical work in our community, or because some of those groups are coming up and forming up in recent times, because now there's an opportunity to do the work, because they recognize that now there's a little bit more support than there has been in the past. So I wholeheartedly support this ask to have staff come back. So I encourage all my colleagues around the horseshoe to support this.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to Councillor Pelosa for bringing forth the motion. I think the principles are sound. I think it applies a lot more significantly in this situation where we're talking about an individual, especially around when you're doing hiring practices and when you're doing committee appointments and things like that. It makes more sense to be able to take a look at the qualifications of the individual rather than say the name or see the individual, and that's where the bias might come into place. With organizations, and especially where we're transferring funds, and sometimes a fair amount of funds, there's a fiduciary responsibility that we have to make sure that the group that's receiving the funds are appropriate stewards of that funding, and that could be anything from previous fraudulent experiences with fund handling as distributed. If we do this in an anonymous manner, I worry that we lose sight over some of those regulatory controls over financing. And I get the other side of this too, that especially organizations without a track record where they haven't had a chance to build that up might find that to be a little challenging. Perhaps through you, Your Worship, to perhaps Ms. Smith, I guess, how with a proposal like this, how could we assure those fiduciary responsibilities are met, especially with respect to the financial obligations, to make sure that that the transfer of those funds is done in an appropriate manner?
Ms. Smith?
Thank you. And through the chair, part of our, if recommended to look at this amendment, what we would do is we would look and do our research look at what other funders, other foundations are doing. And if this is a process they use, a blind application process for organizations, we would definitely look into that and the accountability. Just offhand, you could do it in that typically when an application comes in, we have a pre-qualification round to make sure, for example, are they incorporated? Do they have a financial statement? So there could be a separate through finance or another area that does not impact the review process with the community panel, but looks and makes sure those checks and balances are there. And then finally, we sign a detailed grant agreement with the organization and hold them accountable, both financial and outcome based. So there's many checks and balances that are in place.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, through your worship. That's helpful. I think it would be important. It sounds like there could be some controls put in place. Perhaps the initial review is done on a blind basis, and a subsequent review to make sure that those obligations and criteria are met and deblinded at that point. That might be a phase as well. If the motion is such to explore this but not commit us at this time, I think it would be important to have an understanding of what those risks were to the organization. And I feel a little bit more comfortable with it if the motion is committing us down that course of action. Then I think we want to make sure that there's some safeguards in place for us first. But, thanks for the information.
Thank you. Just on that point then, Ms. Smith, is there anything you want to add to that?
Through the chair, I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two individuals, two councillors who have already spoken, so I will deal with the councillors who have not quite yet, and we'll return to those individuals shortly. So I will go to, excuse me, I'll go to Councillor Hopkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the conversation here. I tend to, first, when I receive these added motions at the last minute, react. I don't really, am not clear. And I think it's fair to say we should be given a bit of more time to understand and explore what the motion is about. I guess we're doing this now through the debate. The more I hear about what we are proposing here, the more comfortable I am starting to get with this motion. I guess my question through you, Mr. Chair, would be then when with this recommendation, we're all we're doing is asking for a report back to explore opportunities that biases are kind of looked at through the structure of the committee. So what I heard Ms. Smith talk about looking at best practices and what other places are doing, but what can we expect? Can we expect this report back soon, or is it just another level of having staff go out and look at things and eventually come back? I just want to know what the timelines are here in terms of trying to understand what we're doing.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you. And through the chair, we have a number of recommended policy changes over the next, some immediately that will impact the 2021, but many of them will impact 2022, 2023, and be in place for 2024. So I'm anticipating that we'll slowly bring back policy changes to implement over the next 3 years for everything to be fully in place for the next multi-year round in 2024. So you will see changes probably on an annual basis for the next 3 years.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for that. So this is really part of the exploration that staff is already undertaking to sort of deal with the process, and it's an ongoing, I guess, review. And with that, I would be supportive of adding this to the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hillier, you had your hand up. Did you wish to comment? I notice it's down now, but do you wish to comment?
Councillor Hopkins pretty much said it verbatim. I received this at 3:54 and did not appreciate it, but I do appreciate that we are looking for recommendations, and I look forward to see what staff comes back for, but I don't appreciate receiving this 6 minutes before the meeting and I can't look into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, You know, I agree with the intent of this motion. I do believe and enhance that belief by hearing some other comments around the horseshoe here that will encourage maybe some groups that haven't gone through this process by you know, putting in their applications, and so by thereby, you know, encourage more groups to have access to this funding. I do share concerns as well mentioned around the horseshoe of fiduciary concerns, and I would hope that you know, the recommendations that come back would address that. So being this is not voting for or against actually doing this, but hearing some recommendations on how we would do this, I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thanks. I withdraw my comments. They've been made by other colleagues.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis, you're coming back in.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I did want to take an opportunity to respond myself to Councillor Helmer's question and share that I don't actually have an example or sort of vision of what this might look like as a for example, because it is a request to staff to go out and look at some practices as part of their ongoing review here and come back with some potential recommendations for us. They may come back with a recommendation that we don't even explore it, and if that's what they come back with, I'm comfortable with that as well. I don't want to presuppose what this would look like at this time. I certainly understand, and I just also want to take this opportunity. You know, we've received a couple of motions this afternoon. I respect where councillors are coming from when they say they'd love to have more time, but I'd also remind them that we are at committee, not at council, and we could actually be trying to wordsmith this on the fly. You know, somebody could introduce a motion right now that we've had no notice on. Unfortunately, it does take some time to put together a motion if you do the legwork of talking to staff and seeing, can they work with this? Is it even feasible before you put something forward? So look, I share the frustration. It is tough to wrap your head around things when you get it at the last minute, but I would ask you to just keep an open mind to that, as well as I try and do when others bring those motions forward at the last minute, as we have later on the agenda with another item that came forward with a motion today.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll offer one apology too. I was struggling signing into eScribe a little earlier on, and I think my previous comments were really directed more towards the main motion. But let me weigh in on this one as well, and with just a concern that this might work at cross purposes, because if it's an anonymous application, then really it may be the subconscious biases that start to play. For instance, I might tend to pick a grant proposal that's written in a style that I would write. And I'd also point out that since it's our goal to help with the community, by seeing who it is, we might recognize that someone who's new or maybe inexperienced at writing these things may need a little help, and we could go and assist them. So I wonder at this point is, since we're so committed to removing racism and taking those biases away, to be able to see them for what they are, or see the groups applying, may help us take some affirmative action. So I wonder if this might not always help us the way we want. So that said, I'm fine with staff coming back with some recommendations, and I'm happy to appreciate the last minute motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list. So with that, colleagues, I'll turn your attention to the motion, which is A, B, and C. The third being civic administration be directed to bring back recommendations for the potential introduction of an anonymized application process for the London Community Grants Program that could be implemented for 2022 funding applications. Oh, excuse me, bear with me. And be used going forward. I might have missed you, Councillor Square. Did you?
No, I just wanted to see both done separately.
So I've gotten a request to pull C.
Whatever the addition is, I thought it was an amendment. If it's an addition, I'd like to vote on it.
C. So A and B, actually the clerk is just going to just clarify the wording on that for our purpose. So I'll just ask you to stand by for a moment. Talk amongst yourselves. Colleagues, we'll be separating C from A and B, and we're just getting the wording for you.
So it's like power, when you're ready, just if you could let me know, thank you.
Through the chair, at the call of the chair, I am ready to open the vote for parts A and B, which would be the original motion in the staff recommendation.
Thanks very much. And again, we ask you to turn on your screens as you vote, please.
Councillor Turner, closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, I'll now turn your attention to item C. If you're looking for the wording on that, if you click onto the 2.1 London Community Grants policy update, you'll see the motion, the addition, and we will call the question.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-2.
Thanks very much, colleagues. I'll turn your attention now to 2.2, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations update. The motion is that on the recommendation of the city manager, the report dated January 26, 2021, entitled Truth and Reconciliation Commission's update on City of London efforts be received for information. Do I have a mover? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Comments or questions? And you can use the raise hand or you're visible if I see you. I see Councillor Hopkins, please.
Thank you for noticing me, Mr. Chair. I'm really pleased to read this report. I think I've been waiting to see where we are and trying to understand how we go forward. So through you, Mr. Chair, I guess that's where I'm going to start with my inquiry about the number of opportunities, I guess, are still in the works. But I'd like to, and we've had the declaration as well. We've had 2 declarations signed. So my question is more around how are we to move forward now? I know there are a few examples that we could host a dinner, that we could have more formal meetings. I understand COVID has created probably a bit of a challenge, but I'd like to understand a little bit more from staff as to what we can expect, we as a municipality, working with our relationships with First Nations, the 3 local First Nations in our area. So if I could have staff respond to what we can expect, say, the next year.
Ms. Livingston.
Through your worship, thank you for the question. What I'll say is I think you can expect much more intentional effort We are in the midst of hiring the Indigenous Community Liaison Advisor and hope to have that person in place in the next, we're just in the middle of the recruitment process, so hopefully in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And that individual will be quite instrumental in helping us to move a number of initiatives forward. But I also wanted to share that earlier this week I met with members of the Indigenous Leaders Circle, and there was a bit of a recognition that yes, COVID has gotten in the way, and perhaps we need to look at instead of waiting for the time that we can physically get together, we need to start looking at virtual opportunities to begin discussions. So we've started to have those discussions, and you can anticipate hearing back from staff on some suggestions for next steps as we start to work through some of those details. On this, in terms of our connection to the neighboring First Nations, but also on a number of other initiatives with respect to truth and reconciliation, and also furthering our efforts in terms of serving better the Indigenous communities.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate staff's response. It's really good to hear that the will be moving forward. I think virtual meetings are the reality of how the norm will probably be, and I'm really glad to hear that staff will be looking at that, and it's going to be intentional. And one last question, I guess it was good to hear that we're going to be in the next 6 to 8 weeks hiring someone which will probably be, give us a better understanding and relationship. How will we be informed as a council when that takes place? Would it come through committee, or just trying to have a better understanding of the process?
Ms. Livingston?
Through your worship, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. If it's how will council know when that person has been hired, I will happily send council a note to that effect. I can also share that we are in the midst of the recruitment process for the director of the Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression Unit, and I will keep council apprised as we move forward with that important position as well.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for that. They're both important positions, and look forward to hearing back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Worship, and thanks to staff for preparing this report. It's very helpful, and I'm happy to see us making some movement forward. I think there's still some areas that we could advance this a little quicker. There's a couple points in the report where it says with direction, those actions could be advanced further. The ones that I'm particularly interested in is the recommendations that the calls to action number 43, 47, and 55. 43 is with respect to the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Persons. And it talks about the different levels of government, the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, and their involvement with this. The federal government having made the declaration, but the provincial government not having done so at this time. Recognizing we're creatures of the province as municipalities, I still think it might go a long way for us as a municipality to make a formal declaration to that extent. And I'm not sure, perhaps I'll categorize my questions to each one of these recommendations through your worship. What would be involved in that, and what would be considerations if the municipality wished to go in that direction?
Ms. Livingston?
Through your worship, I don't have a complete answer to that question. In fact, we're just undertaking a more detailed review of the declaration, also Bill C-15 at the federal level, which seeks to have the declaration live in Canada in concrete ways, as I understand it. So I would have a much better answer for the councillor once we've had a chance to look at what might be possible at a municipal level, given we don't set legislation and those kinds of things, but there is the spirit of the intent. And in fact, that's a question that was raised in the conversation I had with Indigenous leaders earlier this week. So we're undertaking a review at a staff level.
Councillor Sharma?
Thank you, Ms. Livingston. That's helpful. I think the 2017 direction from council still holds in this because there's still some unfinished works for all of that. At number 47, it kind of it seems to be a bit of a dismissive answer towards it because we do have some fairly significant property powers, and the biggest one being expropriations. And I don't know if there's an opportunity here for us to review the expropriations, the way we might exercise expropriations in certain circumstances in this context, because I'm not sure if that's a lens that applies, or if as we're going down the expropriation pathway, we recognize that that's a roadblock or a hurdle, and we don't go down that pathway. But I think I haven't seen it exercised by the municipality during my time on council, but I can see it as the potential to occur. And I think we need to be live to that and understand how we intersect with that. So while it talks about the doctrine of discovery and all of those things, and saying that we really don't have a lot of influence in property matters and how property rights are exercised, I think we do, especially in that circumstance. So I want us to explore that a lot tighter. And 55 is one that I think we can really work on and make some serious progress on. And this is the question of, we call upon levels of government to provide annual reports or any current data requested by the National Council for Reconciliation, so it can report progress towards reconciliation. And it identifies a whole number of data points. And as the municipality, this is our opportunity to work with, say, Statistics Canada and health agencies and enforcement agencies and children's support and social agencies and our neighbors to be able to create a central report that has that information, so that we have a sense of the health and progress of First Nations communities, with urban Indigenous and reserve Indigenous communities neighboring our borders. And I think all of that becomes really helpful for us to set the context of the discussions that we have over the years to come. Because if we don't know where we are, we don't know where we're going. And I think that's the whole point of 55. And if we're going to be a good partner in this, and we have the ability and the weight of a municipal government to draw that information and collect it, I think we need to make a really concerted effort in that vein.
Thank you. I'm sorry, were you looking for a comment from staff on that, Councillor Turner?
Perhaps it would be helpful just to have a sense of whether we need to make direction on this, or whether this is still a standing direction that the council is marching towards, and we should be able to have some deliverables in real time.
Ms. Livingston?
Mr. Chair, a direction is not required. I've heard and understand the comments that have been made.
Thank you. Councillor Turner, are we good?
That's very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst. You're on mute, Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, I was searching for the mouse. So, Your Worship, through you, perhaps I would ask regarding Call to Action 75, a memorial ceremony. Well, one, I would say I'm very pleased that London was not the host to one of the residential schools, but I think we recognize that as a regional leader, we could certainly hold memorial in order to bring awareness to this issue. And has there been any movement on that item through the staff?
Ms. Livingston?
Mr. Chair, I'm unaware of any action taken at the staff level specifically with respect to this item, but I am actually happy to defer to Ms. Armstead to see if she has anything she would like to add.
Ms. Armstead?
Thank you, through the chair. We are working with a Indigenous and non-Indigenous project legacy group at the community level that is supported by a traditional governance structure underlying it with a grandfather and grandmother. And we're working with the London Arts Council and also with Tracy Wright-Eye, who is supporting us with Indigenous research methods to determine from the residential school survivors themselves what they would like to see. They don't actually really like the word memorial. So what it ends up being might not be what we have originally presupposed. And then recently the London Arts Council has hired Summer Brissette to be their Indigenous curator to help with the putting out of a call to Indigenous artists to help us look at creating what the residential school survivors would like. So COVID has inhibited us to really being able to consult effectively by virtual because they like to meet in person. But we are proceeding to build relationships.
Councillor?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to staff for this report. I do feel a sense of frustration. I hear what Councillor Turner said about some of the directions from the previous council are still outstanding, and we would still expect to see them moving forward. And that just tells you the length of time that some of this stuff has been worked on. I'm not finding fault with anyone. I'm just expressing my own impatience with how long some of this takes. Speaking specifically to action number 55, and I appreciate Councillor Turner's comments on that item as well. What's very important to consider in that call to action is working together with neighboring Indigenous communities, working together with urban Indigenous Londoners is also a way to build that relationship that has been ongoing, and a way to continue to build trust amongst our neighbors and friends. Because one big aspect of concern with many Indigenous communities and peoples is that whole idea of compiling data, and how the data is compiled, and who is compiling the data, and who's asking the questions that gets to the data. And there's examples of a colonial mindset in data collection, so much so that in the last Canada census, the local Chippewas of the Thames First Nations refused to participate in the long form Canada census for those very reasons, that who was collecting the data, for what reason, and how and what kind of questions were they asking. And data and knowledge is a very important concept to the people that I've spoken to representing First Nations communities. So I think call to action number 55 is an opportunity for London to foster relationship building and work together on how we're going to get at the kind of data that's needed there, and share that data. And that is another large question, is in the end, who owns the data? And the concept of owning data about myself or First Nations peoples owning their own data is a very, very important concept. So I agree with Councillor Turner that we can definitely move forward with many of these things that are just being presented here for information right now. I would really like to see action on these calls to action. I have a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Livingston about the issue, which is not covered in this report, but the concept of being designated and a significant Indigenous community. I believe this is a designation that comes from the Canadian government, and it leads to additional supports for the Indigenous community that's living in London. I know we were looked over. London, from everything that I've learned, should qualify for this designation. So I'm wondering where we are. I know we've sort of been pushing back on that, and I'm wondering where we are there.
Ms. Livingston.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if I can refer this to Mr. Dickens. I know we have done some work on this very recently, And so perhaps he can speak to where we are in the process.
Mr. Dickens.
Thank you, and through the chair, I was taking notes and my internet cut out at the end there. So could I just get the question repeated? I'm very sorry.
Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dickens. The idea of designating London, Ontario as a significant Indigenous community, and that we were overlooked in that designation, even though based on populations and things like that, we believe we qualify. So I'm wondering where we are in pushing back on that and trying to get that designation for London.
Yes.
Mr. Dickens.
Thank you for repeating the question. And through the chair, we continue to work closely with our government relations staff here at the City of London and to work and advocate on behalf of the Indigenous community with our local federal MPs, as well as with any federal counterparts that often will host or invite the City of London to participate in any discussions on this matter. We continue to make ourselves available and keep the offer open to provide any advocacy or support we can with the federal government to have the City of London designated. I know in the past we have met as part of a collective community conversation. I believe it was with Fanshawe College, and I believe Councillor Deputy Mayor Morgan was present. We made the case then as well. So this is an advocacy that is a long time in the making, but certainly we want to continue the efforts and keep the pressure on the federal government to recognize London the way that we feel it should be.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dickens. And perhaps to Ms. Livingston again, I wonder if this could be something that the future officer that we're seeking to hire could be involved in this process. And again, this you know, having data as provided as some of the examples in call to action number 55 could actually help us in this case. But I'm wondering if perhaps the future employee might be able to join the effort in this.
Ms. Livingston.
Through your worship, yes, there'll be many priorities for that individual. I'm a bit fearful for as they step into their role, but there are clear things that need to be tackled first, and that would be an example of advocacy we need to continue to press on, as well as a number of other elements in the action. So we hear the urgency. And really look forward to having the individuals part of the team and also the support of the entire anti-racism, anti-oppression unit as they undertake their important work for our organization and for the community. So I do hear council's urgency on this, and I am as happy as you are to be getting a resource in place to actually land some.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues, before I recognize Councillor Pelosa, I think it might help as a point of clarification that in my role, I have reached out to senior ministers on this very specific issue, as well as local MPs, to have London so designated. I have been advised to this point that there is a broader review of this designation, which is in place in a few cities across the country. And London, as you rightly point out, is not part of it. They understand the significance of the issue, and they understand London's circumstance. I would tell you that they are looking at our request seriously, but that's in the context of a broader review, so I hope that might be helpful. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to colleagues for the in-depth discussion of this report. As much as this report is the Truth and Reconciliation report and a few calls to action in it out of the 94 that actually exist. Always appreciative as we go through our budgeting process and other processes when the city, when we're discussing housing, women's abuse, poverty in the city, that we recognize that Indigenous people are overrepresented in all of these things, from policing to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And these issues still persist in London. We know human trafficking is an issue. And we recognize a large Indigenous population within the city. And as much as we're making efforts to go forward, clean water and our sewer separations still affect the neighboring Indigenous communities. As we have those conversations last year, the Oneida community had a boil water advisory. They're right on our borders. It's not a far away problem. It's right here. We have a part to play in that as well with our budget. I would encourage any colleague who wants to do further action on calls to action in water, recognizing it's a federal agreement, to reach out and have those meetings as well. As counselors, we can do that. I've met with MP Matheson to be part of those conversations. Also recognizing I serve on a water board to see what we can do and what is available to do more actions outside of our current sitting. Recognizing that out of sight and out of mind, and sometimes out of mind's out of sight, that just because you don't see the problem doesn't mean it's not there. Grateful for these conversations. Councillor Turner brought up one point earlier. I'll just share that it's some frustration. It came through the PEC committee a while ago, but it was in regards to heritage designated home here in London at 172 Central Ave. The house was built in 1881, but of note, it was the home of Dr. Orundayiga, and this was the first Indigenous doctor who hailed from 6 nations of the Grand River who had residency here in London. Currently, that home sits vacant, and members of our community are worried about this being built heritage loss, plus a loss of the Indigenous community and part of reconciliation of letting this heritage fall. So recognizing legally it falls to a property standards issue. I've already reached out to staff, but there's issues like this behind the scenes that are also of frustration of what can we do more as elected representatives. So thank you for the conversation today and for reading this report and looking to see what we can do in all of our discussions and decisions as elected officials.
Thank you. I have no one else on the speakers list. This has been moved and seconded. We'll call the question.
Councillor Lehman. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Let me thank Ms. Smith and Ms. Livingston and their team for putting these two important items on front that we've just dealt with under the consent agenda. That's very helpful, so please extend our appreciation. I have no scheduled items, but under items for direction.
Your Worship, can I raise a point of order?
Yes, please.
I understand on the YouTube video now we are streaming the Zoom screen so that those watching can see our faces. However, I received a message that said individuals are not able to see the results of the votes, particularly the divided votes. And I wonder if it's possible for us, when there is votes displayed in council chambers, whether that screen can be flipped so that those votes can be seen by the public who are viewing the YouTube stream as well. I'd just like to raise that inquiry or point of order. If you could check with the clerks to see if that's possible, I think it would be helpful for the public viewing the meeting.
Thank you. Let's go to the clerk.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, we can switch the cameras around when the vote is on the screen.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful for the public watching the meeting, particularly on votes where it isn't unanimous and they're wondering how their councilors voted.
And we can do that as from the next vote and work right from there. Thank you very much. The prior item was unanimous. So with that, under 4.1 items for direction, the comparison of proposed. Councillor Helmer.
Just getting on the list for the next item.
You're ahead of me a little bit. 4.1, comparison of proposed London Hydro restructuring options, which includes A, added, Holdco versus Newco, submitted by Councillor Van Holst. Deputy Mayor Helmer. Oops, sorry, old habits. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I did circulate a motion that I understand Deputy Mayor Morgan is willing to second, but I wonder, before I move that motion. If perhaps we could just hear a brief overview of the issue from city staff. I know the report lays out a comparison of the options in front of us in terms of the holding company, the holdco option, or the newco option. I know we've had the benefit to read the report, but for members of the public who maybe haven't had a chance to read the whole report, I think a brief synopsis of those two options would be helpful from our staff, and then happy to move the motion that I circulated.
Thank you. Before we call on staff, presumably Ms. Livingston, I'm going to just confirm if Deputy Mayor Morgan is seconding your motion. I wonder, for the benefit of the public, did you want to read that motion, Councillor Helmer?
Happy to do that after we hear from staff. I just think it's important to start with an overview of the issue.
Well, let's do that. Ms. Livingston?
I apologize, Your Worship. I muted myself. I'll introduce it, and then I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Card to provide a brief overview of the table comparison. But the purpose of the report was to respond to a council resolution that asked us to return with an option that could be considered and compare it against the original proposed holdco option that Hydro put forward back in October. Staff undertook to meet with representatives from London Hydro. That included the chair and of the board and the CEO of London Hydro. We had a number of productive discussions, shared information back and forth, and that is what is reflected in the report before you, to identify options that would achieve the end of establishing a mechanism to allow the green button business to move forward. So that's what's in front of you, and if you like, I can ask Mr. Card at a high level to take you through the comparison of the two.
Mr. Card?
Thank you, Your Worship. The comparison part of the report begins at page 32 of the report, and the items that are identified for comparison were developed in consultation with London Hydro. So when you see the items listed in the item boxes, these are all things that London Hydro had either raised or approved for the basis of this comparison. And I don't propose to go through each of the items, but suffice it to say that there is very little difference between the two in terms of satisfying the intended purpose of a new corporation. And that intended purpose is to accept the portion of London Hydro's business, which is unregulated. So if we use the holdco option, we actually would be creating two new corporations, the holdco itself, and the holdco would be the owner of a new corporation referred to in places as LUSI, L-U-S-I, London Utilities Services, Inc. And so either approach will satisfy the requirement that activities undertaken that are unregulated be removed from London Hydro. It's not that the Ontario Energy Board forbids this. However, when affiliates have complex relationships or when individual utilities undertake unregulated activities, it's more difficult for the OEB to determine what impact those activities have on the rate structure being charged by the utility. So for that reason, the OEB has created an affiliate relationship code, which you see mentioned as the second item for comparison. And interestingly, the affiliate relationship code would apply to both the new corporation, NewCo, or to Holdco and LUSI if that approach were taken. The town of Collingwood has recently had a judicial inquiry concerning activities regarding its Hydroelectric Corporation. And there is in the report by Associate Chief Justice Morocco at page 32 a description of the scrutiny that the OEB applies to affiliate relationships. And I know that this isn't the time or place for a complete review of the Collingwood inquiry. It's a very long document running to hundreds of pages, but it does have an excellent discussion of the kinds of issues the OEB looks for in setting, in approving rates that are applied for by what it calls local distribution companies. So one of the things that has come up in the comparison was the idea that there would be some synergy between London Hydro and the new retail corporation under the holdco approach. However, the affiliate retail code makes it clear that no preference is permitted if that's going to have any impact on rates. And secondly, the code prohibits local distribution companies from providing affiliates with customer information not publicly available. So basically, when you boil it all down, there isn't a lot of difference from a functionality standpoint. The main difference has to do with who controls these activities. And at the moment, as you are aware, of course, you are the shareholder. The city, through its council, is a shareholder of London Hydro. And the annual meetings are held by the council. The council appoints the directors. The council receives the dividends through various mechanisms as the owner. Under the holdco option, it's different. The council doesn't control these things. The council controls the holdco, but the holdco controls London Hydro as proposed and Lucy as proposed. So that's a summary of the differences. I'd be happy to answer any more specific questions having to do with the comparison exercise, but we try to condense and simplify these comments to the greatest degree possible to fit into this type of report. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Before we take questions, then I wonder if I can turn back to you, Councillor Helmer, in terms of the motion that's been moved and seconded, but again, for the benefit of all, could you share that with us, your motion, please?
Yeah, so the motion's got 4 parts. The first one is really just to receive the report, which is relatively straightforward. The second part is to direct Civic Administration to go ahead with the new co-model in consultation with London Hydro to say, okay, it makes sense to have this unregulated part of the business into a separate corporation. So let's proceed with the new co-model. The third part talks about not proceeding with the holdco model. And I think it's important that we have those separated because people might have different views about whether we should go ahead with the new co and the whole co or just the new co. And so I think we should have a discussion about that. I've tried to incorporate that into the motion so that if someone wanted to separate that and vote differently on it, for example, you could. And the fourth part is really just to recognize the tremendous work that both the staff and board of London Hydro and our own civic administration have done in grappling with what is a pretty complicated issue and coming to us with a comparison of the options that are in front of us. In terms of why I think the new co-model is the right approach, I think we need to do something to allow for this business to flourish at the appropriate time, and creating the separate company, I think, is going to do that. I do think the issue of control and oversight is very important, and I'd prefer that essentially the City of London be the holding company for these two things, and that we don't create a separate holding company in between the city and the two operating companies. I think that London Hydro has been doing a tremendous job as a local distribution company. They should be commended for the innovation that they've been driving around the green button piece. And I think we can have both the innovation continue and flourish, and also have the public oversight and control that we are looking for as the shareholder. So I think that this is the right way forward. I hope that colleagues will agree with that. You know, if it becomes necessary in the future, for example, that holding company, this is not taking it off the table forever. I just don't think it's necessary now. And I think the new co-model is the right way to proceed. And I think we should be, with the governance of London Hydro in particular, quite cautious and deliberate. So I hope we have a good discussion tonight. I think this is a very important matter, and I hope you'll agree that the NUCO option is the one to go with right now.
Thanks very much. So with that, we'll look for speakers, please. I have Councillor Turner and then Councillor Lehman, please.
Your Worship, I think Councillor Lehman was ahead of me.
Works for me. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. You know, this ever since I heard about this, you know, a couple of years ago when we first got into council, I've swung back and forth. At first, I was very excited and very, you know, pleasantly surprised that we had such an engaged management at London Hydro to be so innovative with, you know, what they were doing for a public utility. Then part of me would swing back going, you know, I think I mentioned this at prior meetings that, you know, should we as a political body be involved in, you know, private sector business? I've wrestled with that, and I think, you know, the benefits are weighing to, yeah, I think we should consider this because, you know, for energy delivery systems, we are in a position to maybe do more than the private sector that could be beneficial to London and our ratepayers. So then the question comes, okay, which structure is going to work for us and work for London best? And I, you know, as with any business thing, you weigh the potential risk to you know, ratepayers and London taxpayers to the potential gain. And so from what I read, you know, I guess if we're going to do this, we want to do it the way that allows this new enterprise to succeed and give them the tools to succeed. In reading the comments from you know, management CEO, the preference for them was a holdco. I think it allowed for nimbleness. They expressed concern about confidentiality in, you know, in the marketplace, not letting their competitors know what was going on, where the other option, a lot of it would be public record. In synergy, you know, which Mr. Card addressed, so he's taken that off the table because apparently that synergy is no longer a factor. It doesn't matter which way we go on this. I guess the biggest thing is for me is again the confidentiality. If a new enterprise is to succeed, they have to be you know, holding their cards close to their vest and what they're planning to do and what they're planning to bring to market. So I guess I would ask maybe the proposers of this motion their thoughts on, you know, handcuffing this new enterprise in that regard with going the direction that they're, you know, that they're proposing.
Councillor Helmer, do you wish to comment as the proposer?
Sure, but I don't know that I want to take too many questions. I think lots of people have lots of opinions about this topic, and I don't want to hog the mic. But for myself, anyway, I do think there's a trade-off between transparency. You know, there's a public shareholder, and we need to make sure the public is aware of what's going on with these business corporations, and the need for the business to, you know, keep its trade secrets and negotiations confidential as they're working through their business strategy. And I think the example of what we have right now with London Hydro is a good example of that working very, very well. You know, London Hydro is an extremely well-run company that's doing very well, and it's owned directly by the city, and we have shareholder meetings at City Hall. And I think a similar unregulated business like this Lucy model could be set up and operate the same way. Is it going to provide all the kind of confidentiality that London Hydro is looking for? Probably not. But it's definitely going to provide the public transparency and oversight that I think is really important. So I do think there's a trade-off there. You know, I think that the existing utilities that are directly owned by municipalities have shown that this can work pretty well. And I think there's ways to navigate through that too, because even the more recent changes to the Municipal Act, for example, that allowed for more discussions in closed session around negotiations and things like that, like those are relatively new provisions. And I think that as long as we stick within the Act and we conduct the business according to those rules, I think we can accomplish what London Hydro is aiming to do. It might not be their first preference, but I think it's still workable.
So before I go back to see if Councillor Lehman has any follow-ups, you spoke of confidentiality, Councillor Lehman. I think it's appropriate that we get some input from Mr. Card on this so that we just have a better sense of it. I think it's a reasonable consideration. Mr. Card, do you have any comments on that?
Well, Your Worship, I agree that the confidential documents could be received in camera, as Councillor Helmer has indicated, and that really there is no handcuffing as the result of that type of discussion. Like ultimately, if I think the main difference between the two schemes is that if the holdco owns London Hydro, the council does not. What the holdco can do in its capacity as the owner of London Hydro is flow more funds through to the new corporation, that the council isn't part of that discussion. But it's a transparency thing more than anything else. It's not about handcuffing. And I don't feel that there's any barrier to effective functioning of the new retail corporation if it's owned by the council as opposed to it being owned by the holdco. The major difference is going to come with respect to financing. And I see that as a virtue, because the financing would be transparent if the council was involved in it, and much less transparent if the holdco was supervising that activity.
Councillor Lehman, any further questions?
Yeah, just one further question to Mr. Card. Cannot the control of funding be achieved as was referenced in the report through board restrictions and the way the bylaws are set up?
Mr. Card?
In a aggregate sort of a way, I think the proposal was $5 million here and $10 million there. That's a lot of money. And the that's the incremental amount. There would be advances through requests and approvals along the way. I think, from our perspective, before that kind of money is invested in an activity, you'd want to see a business case. And I suspect that if the council were being asked to approve those kinds of advances, that there would be a requirement for a business case and justification for the expenditure of that kind of money. Like, we're not talking small change here. So to the extent also that you restrict the ability of the holdco to approve the requests of Lucy, the council would have the right to do that, but it would be taking on the responsibilities that come with making those kinds of decisions. And again, that removes one of the major benefits of having a holding company. So, it's not possible to have it both ways. If you have a holding company, it's basically in charge of these activities. If you withdraw the powers, you become responsible for any consequences that withdrawal causes. And so again, yes, it is possible to withdraw those powers, but it's not advisable from a risk perspective.
Councillor Lehman?
At your indulgence, Chair, just one quick question to Mr. Card then, and I think it was touched on earlier. If we were to go the direction that this motion is directing, would we be precluded from down the road from moving to a holding company corporate structure?
Mr. Card?
No, that's always an option. I think one of the problems with this proposal is that there is no present need to basically unload the retail activities. I've included in the staff report a description of the basis upon which London Hydro has been developing what is not fully described, but which is the green button technology. I think they do mention it and say it's an open platform technology that they're using for the benefit of London Hydro and its customers. And so that's where this has come from. And they don't yet have the revenue that is going to cause concerns at the Ontario Energy Board, in my opinion. But at some point, if we're very fortunate, there may be enough business to justify transferring that business over to a new corporation. in my previous comments, I mentioned that there can't really be any favoritism. The Ontario Energy Board ensures through its oversight that there is no cross-subsidization. So that means that the affiliated company doesn't get any favors. It cannot pay either more or less than a service deserves at market value, that sort of thing. So we're not going to be prevented from making adjustments later on. If the volume of business justifies having a holding corporation, then we could always do that. But there is certainly no present need to transfer ownership of London Hydro to a holding company. That is something that really, has no present justification at all.
Councillor, you're good? Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Lehman asked some good questions there, and my questions were along the lines of that investment and transfer of capital. Between the two models, and the Hold Co and the New Co, conceptually I see it as say dividend potentials coming from London Hydro moving to Hold Co and then being reinvested into Lucy in that circumstance. In absence of that, if we use New Co, then dividend revenues would be realized by the municipality and then transferred into New Co to be able to reinvest. So in those circumstances, it puts the city at the center of that. I think also to that is the opportunity for the municipality to augment some of those investments into the New Co or into the Hold Co based on, say, Economic Development Reserve Fund finances or anything else like that, where we see those opportunities. Is that, am I phrasing that appropriately? Is that the right concept? And before I release the question, can it go the other way? Can revenues and dividends be realized by the New Co or the Hold Co come back to the municipality or back to London Hydro?
Mr. Card?
I can confirm what the councillor has said. The money can flow either way. If the council is the owner of the New Co, then the dividends that are declared by New Co would come back to the city and could be reallocated as the city decides. So yes, and the other comments I also confirm.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, that's helpful. Just as quick comments, I agree with the motion by Councillor Halmer and Deputy Mayor Morgan. I think it makes the most sense. I recognize it's not the direction that's desired by London Hydro, and this is one of the challenges when you broach a subject like this, is that there's the potential for the governing body to make a different decision. But I think staff have done a pretty thorough analysis of the options and the risks associated with those. I am still wary of releasing London Hydro from the City of London's corporate direct involvement. We're not that involved with the operation of the utility. We're pretty arm's length, but we still have accountability and oversight and there have been historic concerns over where the utility ends up going in future years. That remains to hang over this utility as we've got a constantly shifting landscape at the provincial level in terms of how it wants to address either the consolidation or decentralization of utilities in the years to come. And I think the municipal council has a very important role to play in determining that. This is probably our most important government business enterprise. We don't get involved in a lot of them as a municipality, but this one has been pretty key. We've had a lot of conversations in the past about its future, and I think it's important that we're at the center of those discussions and continue to do so. I see the Hold Co as removing us a step from that, and while at the same time the New Co option allows the same opportunities to the utility and to the generation of new business offshoots that the Hold Co does, without relinquishing that level of control that I think we need as a municipal government.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and also thank you to my colleagues who are interested in having London Hydro pursue this business. There's a quote in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, there's a tide in the affairs of men which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. And I think this is the case for London Hydro. We should be excited about that. Everyone, even in the industry, knows that London Hydro is riding on the crest of a technology and are in a position like no other to take it even farther than they are now. Of course, we're selling this technology, we're developing it for ourselves, and then we sell it to others. And sometimes we develop it for others and then bring that in and have it available for our own ratepayers. And so there's a cycle. It's kind of a two-way street. And as we gain more partners that are interested in this, that just grows its momentum. And also we're in the position like no other to take it south of the border, where I see there is a growing demand, and we're being approached by those from that direction as well. And I would say that we've got a lot of street credibility there because we've already been recognized by the White House for the work that's been done. So working with London Hydro is an attractive thing. We're an attractive partner who's already got a product that we can sell. So that's exciting. Unfortunately, I don't see it quite the way that the movers of the motion have brought this. If I looked at the three motions, my feelings is the first one is, or the three options from staff is don't let them play, and then set them up to lose, and then the final one, set them up to win. Which would be the holdco, and I think there's some options there that aren't being recognized, but I would say that there's an incremental approach that's being planned with the holdco. It's not set up a holdco and then a Lucy. Really, what we're doing is first setting up the holdco and then transferring the generating assets to there. And then that's where some of the seed money, the income from those into the holdco is used as to grow the affiliate, which is really the holdco for the time being. And then the contracts that we have with a number of municipalities, those could be there as well, and generating some income. And our goal is to do it slowly. And I think that's a good plan. A really important thing was said in that there should be a business case presented. And I really think we're making a decision kind of in the dark here. If you don't really understand the business, its potential, what it is, why London Hydro suggested the holdco superior to the newco, then really we should get our hydro CEO to come in and describe that. I think rather than just at this point say, no, you can't have what you suggested, we need to give them an opportunity to speak to that. And so I may make a motion along those lines as well. I mean, my favorite motion at this point would just be to take the movers motions and switch holdco with newco. That's the direction I would be going in. But let's have a discussion about this. One of the things I guess I'd like to ask is what we see as the
30 seconds, Councillor.
Okay, through you to staff, or how would we be losing control? What is that worst case scenario that we seem to be afraid of?
Mr. Card?
Well, you have no direct control over the affiliates, Your Worship. If in fact, if London Hydro is owned by the holdco. You have no direct control over London Hydro. You are no longer the shareholder of London Hydro. And one of the things that we can all learn from looking at the mistakes others have made, which in this case, I'm referring again to the town of Collingwood and the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry. They had a holdco arrangement in Collingwood, and the utility was owned by the holding company. And what happened was that there was a lack of communication between these different entities and the municipality that ultimately owned them. And as a result of that, the utility sold half of its shares to another entity, PowerStream, and it received less for that share transfer than if it had accepted an offer from Hydro One that was about, I think it was $4.5 million more generous. But because of inadequate information, the council was not aware of this at the time that it voted. So there's an information problem when you have a holding company between you and your electrical utility. The holding company tells you what it needs to tell you, but you're not involved directly with that company. So do you lose control? You don't own that company anymore. You trade your ownership for the shares of a holding company, and then you relate to the holding company. And I can't say it any clearer than that. It's a convenience to have a holding company manage enterprises for you, but you pay with a loss of control. And I've tried to document that in my contribution to the staff report. There's just absolutely nothing that the holding company does that really you can influence other than through the shareholder declaration. And to the extent you do that, you lose the value of the holding company. So, I mean, I'm hoping I can be very emphatic about what the loss of control means. And this is not an abstract concern. Subsequent to preparing this report, all of us, the city manager, the treasurer, and I have had an opportunity to look at the report of Associate Chief Justice Frank Morocco. It's available on the Town of Collingwood website. I commend it to you. It's called Transparency and the Public Trust. It's a fascinating read. It's hundreds of pages, but there are segments of it that deal with the confusion created by the contracts between the different entities that were owned by the municipality, and how that ultimately led to confusion that cost an awful lot of money. And while I talk about cost, the inquiry cost over $8 million, as well as the other losses the municipality has incurred. So, is there a lack of control? Yes. And the lack of control is partly going to contribute to informational problems. And those kind of difficulties are hard to anticipate and totally address when you're not the owner.
I'm going now to Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And a couple of things, my colleague just before said some things that I don't agree with, and I'll gently disagree. I think to say that by doing the NUCO option, we're setting them up somehow to lose, I think that is far away from what we're doing. Secondly, if there's a suggestion that councillors are not understanding the nuance of the difference between HoldCo and NUCO, I've listened to my colleagues speak so far, and I think they understand quite well the difference. And the last is, quite frankly, the last question asked to Mr. Carr didn't really elicit the answer that was wanted, I don't think. I think it elicited an answer which made it really clear why there's a fundamental difference between the HoldCo option and the NUCO option. And when I went through this detail, first of all, I can understand completely why London Hydro would like the HoldCo option. If I was the manager of a business and I would, as London Hydro is, and see it affiliating off and generating money, I would want the HoldCo structure. I would not necessarily want both structures to have to come back to a political entity and report on that all of the time. Not for any nefarious reason, just because it's easier, it's more convenient. It involves less onerous reporting. But I think we have to put that in the context of what London Hydro means to us and to the people of the City of London. I don't feel that I have a mandate right now that I have ever heard to do what we're doing here, which is basically to almost divest ourselves in some way from the oversight of London Hydro and this new affiliate and put it in the hands of a holding company. Yes, we're shareholders, but let's think about how we're shareholders of London Hydro. I mean, we get a report once a year. We're not very intrusive. London Hydro still gets to run their business as they are fit to do and as they do a very good job of doing. But we still want that direct relationship. I still feel that as a representative of the City of London, the shareholder and the citizens of London, I have to have that oversight. And no one has given me a mandate to move away from that. So that's a challenge for me. I also went through Mr. Sharma's comments, and quite frankly, none of the comments he raised are particularly onerous or difficult from my point of view. I mean, you know, it describes things, but not certain difficulties, but it talks about, even at one point says, well, you know, the clear majority of Ontario corporations do it this holdco way. Well, 59%, I mean, is that a clear majority that are operating it in that manner? I mean, is it that clear? So if we were stopping them from doing their business and carrying on as they want to do, I would have some difficulty with that. And I don't think any of us want that. But I still think we have to maintain, as Mr. Card well pointed out, we have to have that direct relationship with both of those entities and not through a holding company. It's a very different dynamic, a very different relationship, and I certainly don't feel that I have a mandate to do that. And if it comes to that we have to go to a holdco, then quite frankly, London Hydro can come here and make the case why the new co option wasn't working and why we have to go to holdco. That can still be done, but it would have to be a much stronger case than I quite frankly saw in the memorandum that we were given. So I don't intend on speaking again. I'm hoping we can get through this. There seems to be some fairly clear opinions. I'm not sure spending a lot of time is going to change those opinions. So I just want to say to my colleagues, don't let anybody tell you you're not well informed on this issue. You're extremely well informed.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments. I would like to take this opportunity to thank staff for their analysis. I found the report very informative and very understanding of the two options, and it was very very clear to me to see what these two options look like. And I know for some of us that have been around a long time here, when it comes to London Hydro and where is the future of London Hydro, it's always a conversation. And for me, I too have not heard the concerns out there that we have to have a mandate, that we have to go down that road of privatization and how that's going to look like. And as a councillor and as a steward of the public interest here, I do take that very seriously. And for me, when I look at these two options, it is all about control and transparency. And that is with the new co. If anything, I get a little jittery when we start changing these things, but it's fair to say with the information that has been given to us to deal with the unregulated part of London Hydro, and they are innovative. And Councillor Van Holst's advocacy on innovation is very, very apparent, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, it's balancing it out with the public interest and about control. And there is an opportunity here to deal with that unregulated part of the business. So I would be supportive of this recommendation. But I do not take it lightly as well. It's all about control, and the control I see still remains with council in a distant way, but it still does remain with us. And so I will be, going towards the new co option. And again, it's you know, I think we've been given the information that we need to make this decision. So thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Card and then some comments. Mr. Card, and through the chair, my first question is about the structure, the structural diagram that you've put in the report, or the staff have put in the report, where it shows the two different options. Can you tell me, because it's alluded to in the comments from London Hydro, that there would be, you know, more inherent risk in some cases, you know, given the symbiotic relationship between the technology development and marketing and structural separation of marketing and an independent newco would reduce considerable hurdles to its success. I'm trying to understand this difference between the retail affiliate Lucy is still a completely separate entity from London Hydro and would still require the coordination through Holdco to create those sorts of synergies. Is that correct?
Mr. Card?
Your Worship, I don't believe that the synergies are actually achievable as they are described. The problem that you face when you're, regardless of the organization, and I know the option 1 and option 2 are shown at page 31 of the report. And yes, retail affiliate Lucy isn't required for the moment. And when it does, when it is created, it's basically in the same position as NewCo would be if NewCo were undertaking the unregulated activities, the retail activities. And again, going back to the Collingwood decision, there's an excellent discussion of what the requirements are for affiliates. It begins at page 32 of part 1 of that report. But what it says is that the code includes rules prohibiting local distribution companies from selling services to affiliated companies for below market value or purchasing services from such a company for above market value. All services that flow between LDCs and affiliated entities must be set out in Ontario Energy Board approved service agreements. So in answer to the Deputy Mayor's question, that's the obstacle that both of the entities face. So there's no greater synergy with one or the other.
Yes. So the main difference between the two then, since NewCo is essentially the same as Lucy once it's created and structured, is that you either have Holdco as the go-between, which reports to City Council as a shareholder, or you have City Council as the go-between. But fundamentally, the two organizations, LHI and NewCo, or LHI and Lucy, would operate similarly with different, you know, mechanisms to go between the two. Is that correct?
That is correct. Your Worship, that is correct.
Deputy
Yes.
Mayor?
Yeah, so part of my challenge with this is that the idea that you know, in the report, and I will say the reason why Councillor Helmer and I are proposing the NewCo option as something to move forward with is because we want to support the innovation, right? There's a very easy answer to this, and it's just stick with the status quo, let it stay under London Hydro, grow it until the point where the Ontario Energy Board has some concerns, and then deal with it then. If you want to actually support the fostering of this, you either go with the Holdco option or the NewCo option. And so, you know, voting for the NewCo option is voting to support empowering this innovation. And I want to say I really appreciate a line Mr. Sharma wrote in his letter that says, you know, in spite of this, if the City of London elects to follow the NewCo approach, then London Hydro would assist. And I think that's really key, because London Hydro here has a willingness, although this is not the preferred option, to assist. Where I think as a council, we have to be very clear is the difference between these two models is City Council is the go-between. And elected officials and city governments have not always been the ones who want to transfer assets and foster innovation because it takes on some risk. So if we are going to proceed with the new co-option, I think as a council, we have to, as much as London Hydro is willing to assist us with that, be willing to foster some innovation here and be willing to transfer some capital assets over to help this thing grows, much in the way I think London Hydro contemplates Holdco fulfilling that role. There's no reason why London City Council can't operate much like Holdco is envisioned to operate from London Hydro's perspective, except for the fact that we're an elected city government. We don't have, you know, the professional training of a board that you could appoint or set up. But there's no assuming that we would set up a board that way anyways, right? So I think what I'm trying to say here is the new co-option is not the status quo. The new co-option is supporting innovation. It's not the preferred route that LHI has for this. But I think if councillors want to vote for this option, which I'm supportive of, you've got to be willing to take on some risk and be willing to help grow that and do that in close partnership with LHI. I would like to see us have the new co-option and still be able to achieve some of the vision in the ways that LHI is envisioning it as the go-between between these two entities. And the reason why I like the new co-option, aside from the concerns that Mr. Card outlined in the inquiry, which I've read, admittedly, the executive summary, but not the whole hundreds and hundreds of pages, is because I do have concerns about actually transferring the shares of London Hydro to the holding company. There are specific consequences to that. And I also have some desire to control the way that capital moves between the two organizations.
30 seconds, Deputy Mayor.
Sure. And although that does create some challenges for the city government to be that go-between, I do think that it is in the public interest for us to be monitoring those capital flows and have some control over them, because first off, we're dependent upon the dividends that come from LHI. And ultimately, where new revenues are created through Lucy, you know, we would want some influence over how those flowed as well. So I know I'm out of time, but I might weigh back into the debate later on. So I'm supportive of the motion I seconded, but I wanted to emphasize this is still innovation, and we have to be willing to innovate still.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the discussion that everybody is putting into this. This is a really important issue. London Hydro is one of the most important assets to me for our community. And I understand that, you know, there are some questions about how when innovation is happening in the private sector, there needs to be a level of confidentiality. But I think it's important to realize that innovation happens in the public sector too. And when it does happen in the public sector, that happens a little differently than it would in the private sector. I don't believe that the holdco is the way to go. In fact, I actually question the assertion that 59% of utilities who are doing this kind of thing are using the holdco option, because some of those utilities are actually regional utilities with multiple shareholders. London Hydro is a sole shareholder of the City of London situation. So certainly it's different when there are multiple municipalities who are shareholders of their utility, and a holdco is appropriate there. That's not the case here. So I just want to thank the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Helmer for bringing this forward. I'm going to be supporting it.
Thank you. I have a repeat speaker on the list, but I'm not sure if have I heard from all other councillors to this point? Not that you can't come back in. Councillor Van Holst.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments and all the support that you are providing to London Hydro. I do want to point out to Councillor Squire that I wasn't suggesting that people didn't understand the NUCO and the Holdco arrangement. I was suggesting that understanding where and how this green button business can be developed and expanded would be valuable to us in the context of this decision. So it was that it was that business that that I was talking about. Also mentioned that I don't think privatizing is anything has been suggested at all here. Really, what we're looking for in terms of a holdco and that 59% of the other groups, I would point out that I don't think anyone has a new co-arrangement. And the reason is that you've got a CEO and a board chair that essentially run the whole organization, all the things, and are able to coordinate these parts easily. And it was pointed out that it's a little more easy to do this, and that's seen as quite valuable, that they're nimble. And counselors who sit on new core boards have said that it's really important. One of the things that happens when we set up the new co is we're actually injecting the municipal act into this and separating things. So it's almost like saying we're going to start a new symphony orchestra, except that the woodwinds want their own conductor. So there's going to be some trouble there, and not the least of which is the timing that it could take for council to make decisions. So we moved to a 3-week schedule. It's possible to need 5 weeks to turn something around, and we should really only want the most either most important decisions to take that amount of time, and leave the holdco and the affiliate to work through their business challenges with that. I should point out with confidentiality, it's important that in the past we've had a non-disclosure agreement with an organization, and London Hydro's come forward hoping to speak to council in confidential session, but been told no. And so that's a challenge. Surprisingly, even the other day, you can see the effect. You can see the effect of it. So at the end of the report, paragraph before conclusion, on page 36, it said, should council wish to obtain more information about the business of the proposed regulated entity, they would have to do it in camera. So I wrote and it said, I would like to go into camera for the purposes of obtaining more information about the business of the proposed unregulated entity. And but I received a return communications that said, well, we need additional information, including specifics about the information you'd be looking for and from whom. And so even there is a level of inertia that makes it difficult for businesses to proceed. So I've pointed that out. I would like us to also look at the holdco as a possibility there. I know Councillor Squire says, I really want to see things. I want to see the bylaws written out so we can evaluate them then. And I think that might be valuable as well. And also to get some input put in from our CEO on that. Now, previously I said we should reach out to some of these other organizations.
30 seconds, Councilor.
Yeah. Because they're getting success and they believe this is part of this successful model. So I'm gonna pass it off to to see if anyone else has something to say, and then maybe we can split those motions out. Your worship, I could vote on them differently.
So noted. Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry to weigh in again. I had 2 quick questions arising out of Councillor Van Holt's statements. First, I'd imagine that the new co would be subject to having its own board anyway, right? Is that correct? We wouldn't serve as the board of the new co. Through you two, staff.
Mr. Card.
Yes, Your Worship. The new co would be an Ontario Business Corporation, just like Ontario Hydro.
Perfect. So that's helpful because where it pertains to decision making and the nimbleness of decision making, most of those decisions and ratifications are going to be made by their board, not by us. There would be some things that come to us, as specifically probably in terms of seed money and grant funding and things like that. But the operational side of things probably wouldn't rest with this council. The second question, just pertaining to the ability of boards and commissions to divulge confidential information in camera, that I believe was subject to a change in the Municipal Act. But at the time when that discussion had come forward to council, that change had not been in place. Is that correct? Through you to the clerk.
Clerk?
Mr. Chair, yes, the Municipal Act was expanded, but we still need to understand what is to be discussed in order to make sure that it falls within that criteria under the Municipal Act.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you. I can completely appreciate that. So I think both those concerns are alleviated by both those answers. So thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you very much. The one thing I did want to point out as well is the fact that when we have a holdco and hydro underneath that, we can have the same CEO. We can have the same chair of those boards. So, and we probably have councillors sitting on the holdco board. We can have them sit on the board of London Hydro as well as our representation. We can make all those stipulations through the agreements that we have, but there's a speed and efficiency when you've got the one CEO running both of those things, as opposed to needing another not only another board but another perhaps executive as well, because I don't think those can be shared in the NewCo situation. So I did hope to point out that there was some actual efficiencies in the holdco. I can see that there doesn't seem to be support for it. That's too bad. But I'll
explain it later.
I'll ask perhaps and make a motion that part C perhaps we eliminate that and ask that in part B that both the holdco and the NewCo come forward as possibilities to look at, because I would like to see the difference between those two. So can I make that motion, Your Worship, and look for a seconder?
Well, before we do that, I'm just going to say I think C is addressed by your suggestion that we split it out and you can vote against C, and I think that deals with your comment. I'm just going to take some advice on the clerk on B with the amendment you're suggesting.
Okay, well, then I could suggest that C, my amendment is to amend C to be similar to B, in that we would come forward with the declarations necessary for a holdco.
I'd look to the mover and seconder first to see if they're prepared to make that as a recommendation. Perhaps I can go to Councillor Helmer.
No, that's the total opposite of the motion that's on the floor.
If I may, Your Worship, I wasn't suggesting that as a friendly amendment.
It didn't sound too friendly. You're right, Councillor, to be fair. So I'm advised by the clerk that these motions can stand, but if you wish to put something forward after, you're able to do so. Councillor Van Holst, if you have a seconder.
Okay, well, that's fine. Then I suppose if C is defeated, then a subsequent motion could be made. So perhaps that's the best path forward. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I have Councillor Morgan.
Yes, through the chair for Mr. Card. Mr. Card, are there any barriers to the CEO of London Hydro being the same CEO of NewCo should that board want to hire that individual?
Mr. Card?
Not that I can presently think of, Your Worship, but there may be concerns on the part of the OEB that would play into this, and right now I'm not aware of what those might be.
Sure, and further, there's no presuming that the board of Holdco would want to hire the same CEO for both of its subsidiary corporations, and would not the same concerns that you just mentioned exist for the OEB under that structure as well?
Mr. Card?
Your Worship, they would be exactly the same concerns. In fact, my guess is that the skill set for a person undertaking the kind of work that we anticipate for NewCo would be different than the skill set for the CEO of a electrical utility.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So just some final comments from myself. I do not think that there needs to be much of a difference between the contemplated NewCo and LHI's contemplation of Lucy, the retail affiliate. The only difference is council is the go-between instead of a holding company. And I think that, you know, the worst thing we can do is create a situation where LHI does not want to work with us to foster this technology, or has the impression that we do not want to work with them to foster this technology. And so I want to be clear as the seconder of the motion. I think what they're doing is excellent. It's excellent work. And I hope that you will embrace our decision to investigate the NewCo option with you. And we will, you know, we need to be committed to not being a barrier to some of the items that are contemplated of the flows between LHI and NewCo. In that scenario, we get to keep the shares of London Hydro, which is an important factor for many on council, given the comments. And so, you know, the ultimate, you know, win-win here is if we can maintain control over LHI, a heavily regulated industry, and embrace and foster the innovation that they want to create through a NewCo structure, and try to break down some of their concerns of the barriers that would exist with council as the go-between instead of Holdco as the go-between. And I'm certainly committed to supporting that work, and I think our staff are as well. So I'll be supporting the motion as it stands, and I just want to be clear. I think LHI is doing wonderful work, and I hope we can be great partners on this.
Thank you. I have another speaker. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you. So just one last or two last points in response. So I want to say that I'm pretty excited, even though I would prefer to go a different direction. I'm pretty excited about what this council has said, because it's different than what's happening in some of the other municipalities. Now, I would say that the CEO for instance, both Ottawa, who's done very well, and Oakville are the CEO of the hydro, and essentially all the affiliates, and they work them together, and they do a wonderful job. They've increased their, in one case, doubled the amount of dividends that are coming in from the utility alone. But our council has done something different, because for instance, Oakville, the mayor said it was very important that the city not have to invest and make no investment in there. And that was the reason that London Hydro's come forward with this incremental plan, where that's really not required. But our councillors here have suggested that they'd be willing to play a part in that, and move some of those funds into that to try and build that business. And although I think we may not be able to get the same CEO, that could be fine. So with that commitment, I'm even a little more encouraged I will certainly support B and now as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for everybody's concern. I think there's some. Well, I think that's enough said. It's probably time to vote, Your Worship, and I appreciate the discussions. I appreciate the support, and especially your recognition of the work that's been going on, because it is truly exciting.
So if I can, I see no other speakers. I'm going to ask the Deputy Mayor just to take the chair for a brief moment.
Yes, and the mayor is on the speakers list.
Thanks very much, colleagues. I've decided it's appropriate that I weigh in on this as well. To me, it's very important that we support innovation within London Hydro. I think that truly matters. I'd like to give a shout out, as many as you all have, in terms of the outstanding work that the London Hydro team has done to effectively, I think, provide a good return for the city. They've now approached us, and they've provided an option for us to consider how they can move into the retail space in a more effective manner. Staff, as per their direction, has now come back and provided another option for us to consider. And I think the other option, enhanced by Councillor Hamler and Deputy Mayor Morgan's motion, really speaks to the issue of, I think, what the direction that we as a council should take. In no way would I look to inhibit London Hydro's innovative technology approach as they look to move more clearly into the retail space. I think a couple of comments that moved me as I was hearing colleagues talk is that balance between control and the public interest. And I think the public interest is best served by having London Hydro and NUCO report back through to this council. That doesn't mean it's a forever thing. I think we will look at this over time and assess if that continues to be the best next steps. I'm encouraged by Mr. Sharma's comments that he looks forward to working with us, whichever option is considered, but looking to move Hydro forward. And they're a great success story. So my compliments to them, and I would look to colleagues to support the recommendations as they are. So those are my final comments. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, and I'll hand the chair back to the mayor.
So colleagues, I'm asking the clerk to, at the direction of colleagues, to vote on A and D, and then we will, in fact, I think we could go A, B, and D, unless I'm advised otherwise, and then C separately. And I'm getting some nods. So unless I hear anything to the contrary, I'll ask the clerk accordingly to vote on that basis. So clerk, you let us know when we're good to vote, please. So it should be up on your screen.
Councillor Hopkins? Councillor Hopkins?
I vote yes. I'm unable to submit.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Colleagues, I'll now turn your attention to item C.
Councillor Cassidy? Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-1.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I would now like to turn your attention to 4.2, the confirmation of appointments to downtown London. I'd provided for your consideration, and I'll look for a motion. Councillor Lehman.
Yeah, sorry, Your Worship, I should have disclosed this earlier. I will be disclosing a pecuniary interest in this as I'm a member of the LDBA, so I will be abstaining from this discussion and vote.
So noted. Thank you very much. So look for a motion to approve that slate. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any comments or questions? Then I'll turn your attention to the screen.
Councillor Cassidy? Closing the vote, the motion carries 13 with 1 recuse.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate the new appointees to downtown London, and thank those as well who are maintaining their status on the board as well. Colleagues, 4.3 is the first report of the governance working group, and I will look for a motion to approve this report. I have Deputy Mayor Morgan, as you're the chair of the governance working group, are you prepared to move that?
I'm very prepared to move it, yes.
Seconded by, I see Councillor Van Meerbergen. Comments or questions? I have Deputy Mayor Helmer, and I've got a list after that. Thank you. Sorry, I keep giving you the old title. I apologize, Deputy Councillor.
I'm just ignoring it. Yeah. So a couple questions. One is about the review process for the advisory committees to take a look at these amended terms of reference. I just wanted to say as a comment, I appreciate this direction coming from the working group. I think I'm not totally sure about the revised terms of reference myself, the direction that we're heading in, but I think the process of having the drafts done and circulating those to get feedback specifically on the idea is the right way to proceed. So I'm willing to support that now, although I haven't really made up my mind about the terms of reference themselves. The second one is about the part B that was included here. This is about the code of conduct. And I wasn't able to participate in the discussion at the working group directly, so I guess I'll have to ask the question here through the mayor. Just some explanation about why it's necessary. We already have in the general policy for advisory committees some rules around how people are to conduct themselves and a mechanism for dealing with people who are outside of those rules. And so I just wonder, perhaps Councillor Squire, who brought this forward, or someone else on the committee could speak to why this is necessary and what exactly is envisioned in terms of adjudication and enforcement processes. There are a lot of people who serve on advisory committees, and I want to make sure that the direction we're going in is solving a problem and that it's going to be better than what we have now.
Let's start with the clerk, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, the advisory committee code of conduct is very general in nature. Council last March, I think it was last March, passed a respectful workplace policy, which also the advisory committees is subject to that. So it's bringing it up to date with where we are as a corporation with respect to our policies. And it speaks to things as to treatment in social media and outside of meetings as well. So it's to bring it up to date with what we have in place for the corporation. I'm not sure if Councillor Squire wants to add to that, as it was his motion, but it was our intent to update the code of conduct in any event.
Councillor Squire, do you wish to add to that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not a complete reworking of it. It's just to bring it up to date with the Workplace Act, because there are concerns about whether we've gone far enough to include that aspect of it in. And the clerk actually, when I brought the motion, said she had this to work on anyways and was going to do this anyways to make sure that it's brought up to date and is comprehensive enough so that we avoid any liability under that act. That's the purpose. The other issue that may be of some interest to council, and we'll eventually, of course, get to deal with it, is if there are complaints, where do they go? And there's a concern that if it goes to council to adjudicate, is that the proper venue where we actually appoint them? So it's not to put anything more onerous on the committees. It's really an update to fill in any gaps that we might have, and that was the intention.
Councillor Hummer?
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. If I might, I had a question specific to the motion. Just trying to pull it up here. In 3.1b, civic administration be directed to proceed with drafting revised terms of reference based on the proposed changes set out in the staff report dated November 10th. Advisory Committee Review Interim Report 3. In that, when it came to council last time we had the discussions, there were some items that were identified as perhaps not the direction to go, and there were some modifications there. One of those big ones is reflected in the action that did occur, which was to go back to the advisory committee's members and ask them for input and discussions. So I'm not quite sure because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's included in the November 10th report. Is that to incorporate everything that was recommended in November 10th report, or parts thereof, or how does that work?
Let's ask the clerk.
Through Mr. Mayor, the remainder wording of that clause, which says incorporating additional direction from municipal council and the governance working group, was to incorporate the changes that that council approved after the November 10th report came in, plus some additional comments that were received at governance working groups. So it's not exactly the November 10th report, it's the November 10th report as amended by council.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, that's helpful, because I'd see it as not only additions, but also some deletions from it. So the way it's worded there kind of makes it sound like it's all plus a few things. So no, that's helpful if that's the intent of the motion. I'm also with Councillor Halmer. I reserve judgment to see what those changes recommended coming forward are. I do appreciate that the draft is circulated to the members of the advisory committees as well, and that we see what those comments are.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And not to repeat what my colleagues have just talked about, the terms of reference, I guess that's still to be determined, but I am glad to see that in C that we are going to be going back to the advisory committees for input on the terms of reference. I guess through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, how is that report going to look like from the advisory groups? Would the chair be coming forward to the governance working group, or would it be done in a report? I'm just trying to understand a little bit more how that is going to be reported back to the governance working group.
We'll ask the clerk.
Through Mr. Mayor, our intention is to bring the draft terms of reference to the advisory committees as a committee meeting to receive input from the committee as a whole, and then provide that information back to the governance working group as to the statements that the committee as a whole indicated when they reviewed it. I'm assuming that will be incorporated into their minutes or the report coming out of that advisory committee meeting when they review the terms of reference.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, can I have further clarification on that? So it will come, the advisory committee's reporting on the terms of reference will come back to the committee of the whole and then to the working group, or vice versa?
Clerk.
Through Mr. Mayor, as per the direction, we would bring the the information or the comments from the advisory committees back to the governance working group, and then they would then make a recommendation, and council has access. We provide the governance working group agendas to all members of council, so it would be available.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. And I know I sat in for part of the governance working group meeting, and I know the conversation was back and forth around community engagement and the importance, and that's why I'm glad to see that there'll be further engagement. I think it's really important that we hear from the advisory groups that I think that's where the agenda should be coming from, and how to improve and to what's already happening. I think it's really important to me that we continue those conversations and not be afraid of them. So very supportive of C, and we'll see what the terms of reference look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Oh, Your Worship, I think my issues have been addressed, and I know that the committee passed along a number of ideas to the clerks, and that I had spoken with them subsequently on some that were also going to be included in the terms of reference. So I'm pleased to see what this will look like when it returns.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I think being a member of this committee, I think where we arrived at was that we're still involved in a process. The process is still ongoing, and we determined that we want to have something concrete to go to the advisory committees to see what they think of it. And that's what's going to happen. So it's a process with no decisions having been made yet. And so I know that every councillor and the advisory committees are going to have a chance to weigh in on whatever is proposed. And I have no doubt, having read so far, that the advisory committees are going to, and their members are going to tell us exactly what they think. And that's fine, and that's good. And then ultimately, however, we will have to make some decisions, and that's good and fine too. I think the one issue that I think we always have to keep in mind, and we learned this at the last meeting, that in the last go-round of consultation, every single member of every advisory committee received by email a request to provide their input. So we have scrupulously followed the course of anything we do. We are getting input from the advisory committees, and that is, of course, as it should be. But I am hoping, and I expressed this with some frustration at the last meeting, that eventually this council gets to a point where we say, here's what we're going to do. Because I think advisory committees are crying out for change to make their role more effective. And I think it's up to us to give that to them.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually going to strike some of my comments because Councillor Squire just iterated them for me. I think this is the right step in terms of moving forward. At some point, we will reach a decision point. But until we have an actual concrete draft terms of reference and framework, it's hard to make a decision because we're talking in generalities. So this will be the step that allows our staff, the clerk's team, to bring forward that concrete proposal. I am going to echo what Councillor Squire said, though. At some point, a decision will have to be made, and not everybody's going to be happy with it. But I'm cognizant of what our city clerk said at our last governance working group meeting. That is, she has been basically working on a review of advisory committees pretty much since the day she arrived at the City of London. And at some point, the onus is on us to make a decision. Certainly, we're going to hear more from the advisory committee members in a committee setting again. I found the individual responses very helpful. And I think there were some common themes in there, some very good themes that we can take out of that. Not that everybody agreed with them, but there were some good parts in there. And we'll continue to get those as we move forward. And hopefully, when we do get that next report from the clerk staff, we'll be at a point where we can start making some real concrete decisions on how we move forward to make these bodies more effective.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, I want to thank my colleagues for their comments and of course, patience as the committee works on this item. The drafting of an actual document for feedback, as has been noted, is in our opinion, the appropriate next step, because that's going to give us the best possible next round of feedback. And we did feel it was important not to just take that feedback, come up with something and present it to SPPC, but take another round of go back to the advisory committees. And frankly, to yourselves as colleagues, if you see items in the draft that you would like to raise at the working group, that would be valuable at that time as well, so that we can get something finally in front of SPPC sometime this year for a final vote and discussion of council. But it's an iterative process. It is taking some time, but I think we're trying to be genuine with some cycles of feedback on each version of this. I think there has been a lot of speculation of what we are and aren't doing based on some comments that have happened at the debate. But as for the actual motions and directions that the committee has made, it has been slow, very deliberate, and with a purposeful engagement with those stakeholders who are involved. So, I look forward to the next steps upon your approval of this report today, and we'll continue working at it.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list, and we have a motion duly moved and seconded. I will call the question.
Councillor Hopkins?
I'm unable to submit. I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Colleagues, I'm not aware of any deferred matters nor additional business. Adjourn. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our staff. Ms. Livingston, I reflect back, it's that you became city manager, and 2 weeks later, the pandemic was sprung on all of us, and I think all of our staff have acquitted themselves incredibly in exceptional circumstances, and particularly as we deal with all the issues we have to on a regular basis. So I know I speak for council when I say to you and to staff how grateful we are and appreciative of the work that you do. So with that, I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Squire was pretty excited about that. Councillor Hopkins, a little less so, but she was there. That's great. Let's go all on the screen and let's do a hand vote on this, please.
Motion carries.
At 6:25, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.